Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, Sow, Grow, Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. So trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of Sow, Grow, Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast, which is dedicated to nonprofit leaders who are passionate about making a difference. I'm your host, Haley Cooper, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on a journey of growth, inspiration, and transformation. At Lead with Heart, we believe that leading with heart means embracing empathy, compassion, and authenticity in every aspect of our work. It's about putting people first, fostering genuine connections, and creating a positive impact that goes beyond numbers and metrics. In the nonprofit world, it can often feel like we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. The challenges are immense and the road can be lonely. But here, you're not alone. This podcast is a community where we support each other, share our stories, and learn together. Each episode will dive into personal and professional development topics tailored specifically for nonprofit leaders. From innovative fundraising strategies and effective team management to self-care practices and leadership insights, we're here to provide you with practical strategies that you can apply to your life and work. My goal is to empower you, elevate your leadership, and engage your heart in all that you do. I want to help you navigate the unique challenges of the nonprofit sector with confidence and resilience, so you can continue to create meaningful change in the world. So whether you're driving to a meeting, taking a break, or winding down for the day, tune in and join us on this journey. Together we'll discover what it truly means to lead with heart. Thank you for being here. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Lead with Heart podcast. This is your host, Haley Cooper. And today we're diving deep into the state of philanthropy, what's changing, what's working, and what's next for generous individuals and the nonprofits that rely on them. Joining me is Bill Jarvis, Managing Director and Philanthropy Executive at Bank of America Private Bank. Bill has spent many years helping families and institutions navigate the complex world of giving, aligning their values with their impact. Today, we're talking about the brand new 2025 Bank of America Study of Philanthropy conducted in partnership with the Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy. This study offers a fascinating look into how affluent households are giving today and what those trends reveal about the evolving nature of generosity. Well, Bill, welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks, Haley. Great to be here.
So for those unfamiliar, can you tell us about the 2025 Bank of America Study of Philanthropy? What is it? How's it conducted? And why is it an important barometer for the philanthropic landscape?
Okay, so this is a study that, as you said, we've conducted every other year since 2006, a long time now, in partnership with the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. They're famous for doing a study of mass giving in this country called Giving USA. Many of your audience will know that comes out every year. Our study comes out every other year, and it's a study not of mass giving, but of what we call affluent giving. So call it the top 4 or 5% of assets and income in the country. And what we do with the Lilly Family School is they hire a well-known opinion research firm called Ipsos. Ipsos has a division called the Knowledge Panel that recruits people to take surveys. And so this is a sample of 1,514 households with assets of at least $1 million, not including their primary residence, or income over $200,000 a year. And that may not seem very high net worth to you all, but it was back in the day. And to give you a sense of the averages, this actually is a study that does go fairly high. The average net worth in the study in our 1,500 households that we survey is over 24 million. The average annual income is over nearly $600,000 a year. So very much for those of you who are listening today, the kind of group we're surveying here that you would want to have as your anchor donors, as your people that are giving to you. And this is where it's important to know, because just to give you a sense, Haley, the giving in this country still remains quite robust, but it has been declining during this century, the 21st century. So when we first started doing the study, if you look back not to 2006, but say to 2015, we had 91% of these affluent households in our study at that time giving to at least one charity. By this year, 2024, which is the calendar year that the study surveys, it was 81%. Now, that's still 4 out of 5 households. We'd say, wow, that's a decline. When you compare that with general giving, as surveyed in some of the larger surveys, again, go back to the beginning of this century, Haley, 2/3 of American households were giving to at least one charity. By 2020, that was less than half, 47%. So the message here, for those of you who are viewing today, is that these affluent donors have become more and more important to what you're trying to do. They're sustaining, in terms of their dollars, the monies that are being given out today. That's not to say that mass giving doesn't matter, because the affluent households don't want to be alone. If you're running a campaign, if you're thinking about ways to strategically raise money, of course you need to pay attention to those affluent households, but those affluent people themselves want to see breadth in the donor base. So you've got to have a base that not only has affluent households, but also has middle class and mass households in it as well. And that's really the task that many fundraisers and founders and heads of charities and nonprofits have to face today.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But correct me if I'm wrong, the trend is that less people are giving, but the amount of generosity has not changed in the last few years. If anything, it's gone up. So can you talk a little bit more about that trend in detail?
Yeah, the dollars have held up. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about inflation-adjusted dollars. So when you read the reports year by year, they'll say, hey, the dollars are up. That's great. Okay, fine. But if you inflation adjust it, what's really important is the dollars are holding steady. They're not going down. And so in real terms, generosity in this country does consist of real spending, being consistent, being held where it should be, we hope where it should be. The challenge, of course, then is to be sure that you know where it's coming from. And as I said, more and more is coming from this smaller group. They're the ones who are sustaining the real purchasing power, the inflation-adjusted purchasing power of those amounts that are being given.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for explaining that. What is something that surprised you most in this year's findings?
Well, I guess surprise is too strong a word, but let's say encouraging. We survey not only dollar giving, but other kinds of philanthropy. Really, 4 kinds if you think about it. One is the dollar giving we've just been mentioning. The second is very important, is volunteering. And volunteering can be, Haley, a gateway to philanthropy. And of course, in the pandemic, volunteering collapsed. So we went from having volunteering rates in this affluent population being in the 40s, say, percent, high 40s, to being down to 30%. You would have thought it would have disappeared entirely, but no, people volunteered virtually. It actually worked, but it's been creeping back up. And I think that's very encouraging. We do see, or let me just grab a number for you here from the study. So we had 43%, up from 30% in the 2020 study. So it's been climbing back up. And they're volunteering with 2 organizations or more. Some just volunteer with 1. And that volunteering activity takes a whole bunch of forms. It could be sitting on a board. Okay, fair enough. But some of it is packing food, doing packathons. Some of it is ushering in your place of worship and stuff like that. So it's a fairly broad thing. But my point is, when I think about volunteering, I call it the gateway to philanthropy, because this is a topic that we'll turn to in a minute. Many nonprofits think, or if you ask nonprofit leaders why a person should give to them, they'll say, well, you should give to us because we have a need. And that's great. But I can tell you from successive iterations of our study that among this affluent population, organizational need on the part of the nonprofit is not a top motivation for giving. It's in the middle. It's there. Okay, they need the money. Yeah. What is at the top? My values, interest in the area, that kind of thing. And this is where volunteering becomes important, because if people volunteer, actually in response to a need. They do. They go in and they say, oh, there's a need for me. And then they go into the organization, Haley, and they look around and they say, wow, this is really interesting. This is aligned with my values. It's something I'm interested in. And that then gives them the confidence to open up their checkbook or take out their credit card and start donating. And we know this is important because in the case of volunteers, those who volunteer give not quite, actually 3 times as much, more than 2.5 times as much as those who do not volunteer. So volunteering gives people the knowledge and the confidence to be able to make these donations and larger donations.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that throughout my career. I was just at a gala a few weeks ago, and someone who has been volunteering for years at this organization that I used to work with, I don't really think she had given a lot in the past, but she volunteered every week until the pandemic. And then obviously that transitioned a little bit, and she came back and she raised her paddle for $5,000 because she was there. She had seen the impact of the organization. She was actually volunteering at the event. Like, she was committed. And that's just an example of people who have their feet on the ground, their hand in the work, and they are so passionate about it that they're willing to give. And so, as we're talking about volunteers, I have seen a lot of nonprofits struggle with this. And as you talk about, it's crazy that it's 3 times as much as non-volunteers. So
not quite 3, but yeah. So close to 3. Yeah.
How can nonprofits translate that insight into practical engagement strategies?
Well, I do think certain types of nonprofits are structured in such a way that they're open to accepting volunteers. So that's fair enough. Others are not. It's just a different matter. But to the extent that your strategic plan, and all of you who are listening here should have a strategic plan for 3 or 5 years to show what you're going to do and how much it's going to cost and how much you can get from donations and how much you're going to have to fundraise and all of that stuff. Finding a strategic way to think about engaging volunteers, I believe, should be part of that strategic plan. And here's the other thing, Haley, and I think this is something that you see episodically in newspapers. There'll be a situation, and I'm sure this has happened in many of the communities of the people who are listening today, where a person passes and in their will, they leave a substantial amount to a nonprofit. And the nonprofit says, but we barely knew them. Turns out that they were doing something quiet off in the corner, or they had volunteered, or they had come to an event and it moved them. And they weren't big donors during their lifetime, but they decided that as they exited this world, they were going to do this. And so this is where being conscious of the fact that even donors of modest means can, in the end, be, if not posthumously at the end of their lives, substantial donors. And you have to think about that and be open to that. And one way to do that is to have a considerate and caring volunteer program.
Yeah, I think that's definitely important to not only steward your donors, but steward the people who are helping your work on the ground and sometimes doing the dirty work. So I want to talk about one of the concerning stats in the study around the next generation gap. So the report said, while half of couples make giving decisions together, only 13% involve children or younger family members.
Yeah.
What are we missing when we don't bring the next generation into those conversations?
And I hate to say it, Haley, but this is a very consistent finding over multiple iterations of the study. And we find that people of the generation possessing the wealth do not typically involve next gen, children or grandchildren, in their philanthropic decisions. And that's very anomalous because, again, according to our study, they tell us that they're going to leave about 80% of their dollars to their children and grandchildren. And so this amount is going to get dumped on them. This is the great intergenerational transfer without really much sense of values transmission. And it's really too bad. We at Bank of America do try, when we're counseling people of means, to get them to think in these terms. But it's obviously, I'm not speaking of Bank of America's not being able to do this, but certainly it seems to be something that, generally speaking, in the world of financial advice, it's a real problem. And one wishes that there were a better way to think about this. But it happens to be the case, and it happens to be relatively universal, and it's not moving. Now, if you're thinking about how I would counsel families to do this, families of means, you have to really think about work beyond your generation. And you also, as a person who has perhaps created a company, many of the people in our study, most of the people in our study are not heirs. They're people who have built businesses during their lifetime. So they've created that wealth. And that may be part of the issue too. They may say, well, this is something that's personal to me and I don't want somebody else to put their hands on it. But the point is they will get their hands on it through bequest or another means. And so it seems to me that the task here really is a task of discernment of intergenerational aspects. And this is something that we see in the study. We do cut the data by generation. And it's true that members of Next Gen, by which we're talking about millennials, people in their early 40s now and younger, do give at a lower rate than their elders do. And they give for different reasons. The reason they're giving at a lower rate is, as I said, because they're primarily building businesses and raising families. And they are philanthropic. They're just not quite as philanthropic. But if you think about the topics that they are interested in, there's some profound differences between people in the millennials and Gen Z generations and their elders. So let me give you a couple of examples. When we ask what are the important causes that are important to you, climate change is mentioned much more significantly by Next Gen. What is mentioned less? Religion. What is mentioned less? Arts and culture. And so if you're a traditional religious establishment, if you're a traditional or even not traditional arts and culture organization, these are things you need to be aware of because Next Gen has much less interest in those areas than their elders did. And that will have to inform strategic fundraising efforts. So for example, before this call began, we were talking about donor advised funds. Planned giving is also an important part of that because if you accept that there will be a smaller cohort, and we've seen data from the Pew Charitable Trust does research on religious affiliation. They came out with a study earlier this year that seems to indicate that there was a final sort of bottoming out, as it were, in the decline in religious participation among younger people. But the point is, I don't think anyone disagrees that in most sections of the country, it's going to be a smaller cohort. And so if you are a religiously oriented organization, particularly a traditional organization, you have to think about the baby boomers and their elders and getting the planned giving gifts in. And that is an important part of the task now to be sure that actually happens. Again, from the study, we know, I mentioned that a substantial portion is going to go to heirs, to children, but there will be about 17% that will go to secular and religious organizations. And this is something that's worth thinking about in terms of where you're going to go with these gifts and how you're going to plan these things. And conversely, if you're a climate or environmental-based charity, you might be thinking, wow, this is really great. We've been very frustrated because we haven't been able to raise the monies from the elders, but Next Gen is coming along and they have a substantial interest in this, or at least they tell us that they do.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight. It definitely provides more clarity behind why the different generations give for different reasons. And you're touching on the focus area of the next generation. And in the report, it says nearly 80% of donors are giving to causes in their own communities.
Yes.
So what does that tell us about trust, connection, and local impact?
Again, this is a very consistent finding in the study. There is some giving out into other areas, but by and large, people are giving in their own communities. And then, as you can see, it goes out to state, to national, a small proportion to international. So in that sense, it's actually encouraging. Again, we certainly saw this in the pandemic and afterwards, where there was a huge concentration, a huge focus on giving locally because there were these existential issues that were happening with local charities. Even if they were getting PPP money or other money, they often had to close their doors, they had to have increased expenses and so on and so forth. And so there was this leaning in to local giving. And that was consistent beforehand. It kind of zoomed up during the pandemic, but it has not really gone away. And I think that's very important for local institutions to understand that the people of means in their communities are in fact dedicated to the support and improvement of charities in those communities.
Is there a specific trend that you see why during the pandemic and even after, people are shifting away from national or global causes to more community-based giving?
Oh, I wouldn't say it was a shift away. I would say it was just always consistently there. I'm sorry if I was not speaking clearly enough.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. And that, I think that helps, like you said, local nonprofits to know that there is opportunity being a local community-based organization.
And we haven't really come yet, Haley, to the topic that I think many people will have tuned in for, which is what does this affluent group give to in terms of incidents of giving and dollars? So if it's okay with you, maybe I'll just address that.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. We give people a list of types of things that they can give to, and we have space for people to write things in. So we have a pretty good sense over time of what we call the incidents of giving. That is the type of nonprofits that this affluent group gives to, and then the way the dollars come out. So if you think about the top three, it's basic needs. 43% of our households are giving to basic needs charities, food, clothing, shelter, that kind of thing. Right behind that at 38%, despite what I said a minute ago, religious organizations. Bearing in mind that religious organizations are often, Haley, themselves vectors for the provision of basic needs, right? They have soup kitchens, they have clothes pantries, and so on. So that's important. Then behind that, in terms of incidents of giving, is health and youth, young people, and health and medical research. If we then dig a little deeper, though, we have both K through 12 education and higher education as categories that people can give to. And for this group, as you can imagine, K through 12 education is probably not the public school PTA. It's going to be their prep school, their boarding school, where they went to, where they send their kids. And then higher education, of course, their college. So we have 21% giving to K through 12 education, 17% giving to higher education. If you combine that and eliminate the overlap, education taken as a whole rises to the third category, number 3, right behind basic needs and religion in terms of the incidence of giving. So education taken as a whole is very important to this group. In terms of the distribution of the dollars, that's also something that will rhyme with this. In this case, the dollars primarily go to religious organizations. 39% of the dollars go to religious organizations. Again, some partly for religious comfort, partly also for social benefit. Then behind that, you have the basic needs charities getting 16% of the dollars. And then we have higher education at 14%, K through 12 at 13%, 17% of the dollars, roughly the same as basic needs, going to education taken as a whole. So this is important to know, and this is very consistent over the years. They will flip a little bit. Religion and basic needs are always contesting with each other. Higher education had a big surge in the last iteration for 2022 because there were some lumpy gifts. But these concerns are the concerns of this group, the alleviation of the material needs of their fellow citizens, the provision of spiritual comfort and also possibly material needs, and the provision of education.
That's fascinating, and I love data. So thank you for diving deep into that and really giving us an idea of where philanthropy stands and where these nonprofit or these donors are interested in what areas and how nonprofits can really view that. So based on what you're seeing, what do you think the future of philanthropy looks like?
Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs, helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more.
That's a big topic. Well, let's take a few big themes, and I'll be very high class here, and I'll think back to the 1830s when a French nobleman named Alexis de Tocqueville came to the United States from monarchical France. He was a nobleman, he was a monarchist, but he looked around and toward the eastern United States and said, wow, all the beautiful and softening and artistic things that we get from the crown, from the king, or from the church in France, here in the States, there isn't any of that. There's no established religion. There's no king. People have to do that for themselves. And so he identified from the beginning this American trend to association, which is what he called it. And from that time, even from before that time, but he put a name on it in his book called Democracy in America that he wrote that's still in print, that Tocqueville model of American society has still persisted through various iterations. And I know in the last 20, 25 years, there's been a lot of anxiety about how people don't belong to associations as much anymore and so on. You ask a question about the future of philanthropy. Philanthropy enables people to associate. It provides that commonality of purpose so that they can be together, they can do a thing in which they're committed to each other, whether it's, as I mentioned, a packathon, whether it's volunteering or whether it's ushering in a church or whether it's attending a concert that they've sponsored together or whether it's helping at other types of things, a food bank and so on. These are things that we can do together that express values that in other countries around the world are typically not done by individuals. They're often done by the state. And this is what makes the United States and the model that we have here really quite unique. The nonprofit sector is a true third sector in this country, has been for a very long time now, and is part of, I'll just use the word, our DNA. So looking forward now, you ask the question, what's the future of philanthropy? I would argue the future of philanthropy is being able to find a way to continue to be responsive and flexible because the society we live in creates that philanthropy. The things that are important to the people in society are the things that will get funded and the things where people will volunteer and the things that people will give bequests to. And so it's not even, you could use a cheap word like relevance, but it's deeper than that. It's how people, as I said earlier, find their own values and their own deeper personalities reflected and how they can actuate on that I think represents a good picture of the future of philanthropy. And you can take a look certainly and say, well, climate change up, religion not so much, arts and culture not so much. But that doesn't mean they'll go away. It just means that there will be a base there that does that work at a level that is the level that society appears willing to support. Does that address your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think that's so important. And I've mentioned this before in the podcast that I saw somewhere on LinkedIn that the trend that affinity trumps capacity in some respect. And I think that goes to the values alignment, right?
Absolutely.
If someone really, their values really align with a mission, they are going to give because they care about meeting that need or whatever it is, right? To inspire generosity within their community. And so I think that is really important to tap on for nonprofits to understand that people want to align their values.
I think it's also, we have to think about the way human beings are constructed too. We're mortal, right? And so to the extent that you can, through money, see to it that a nonprofit perpetuates work beyond your lifetime, you're achieving a kind of immortality or a kind of life beyond your life on earth. And that can be extremely valuable and extremely motivating to people.
Interesting. If you could give one piece of advice to nonprofit leaders listening based on everything this study reveals, what would it be?
Well, private foundations accepted. Private foundations, of course, are funded by a family or by an individual. Typically, they don't go out and raise funds after that. So let's leave that to one side. But I think the idea of strategic investment in development in fundraising professionals is something that really should be part of the structure of a nonprofit. And even a small nonprofit, I don't know a single nonprofit that wants to stay small. I don't know a single one that has an endowment that doesn't want to grow that endowment. And it doesn't mean that you go willy-nilly hire a bunch of people, but we talked earlier about the idea of a strategic plan. If there is a coherent strategic plan, that strategic plan should include the funding of a strategic investment in development. Because this work is not, as we've seen from our study over many cycles, this is not about a bunch of bored people going out and asking their friends to give money. It's about this courtship dance of finding the values alignment that can get a person to take out their credit card, to open their checkbook, to put a clause in their will, whatever it's going to be. And that has to be more strategic over time. And particularly if you're looking, this is something that the Giving USA study, the Indiana University people have on their website information about this. So I'll refer to it in general terms. It's not in our study. But there's a loose alignment between economic conditions in this country and philanthropy and giving, broadly speaking. And although there are some communities in America that do tithe, they give 10% of their income, Broadly speaking, in this country, we give between 2.5%, and 3% of our GDP every year to charity. Less when the economy is doing badly or the stock market, more when it's doing well. But that seems to be the barometer. So that's what you're playing with here. And as the economy grows, obviously nonprofits want to be able to get a piece of that. But it's not going to come to you just by sitting and waiting, I guess is my point. You need to find a way to have that values alignment be there and to go and get your share of it from people who become committed to giving you what they're going to give from their surplus, or sometimes even from their not surplus, to sustain your part of your mission.
That's important.
I would like also to put in a word for endowment, because that's my real specialty, is endowment and investment policy. Endowment can be like capital. It isn't capital, but can be like capital. A stabilizing force for a nonprofit, something that says to the world that you have assets, that you have resources, that you have consistency and the ability to live out beyond annual fundraising. And so thinking about, for example, if you do get that bequest that comes in and you say, wow, here's X thousand dollars that we didn't know we were going to get, maybe you should spend all of it right away. Maybe you should say, okay, let's have the board vote and create what's called a quasi-endowment or a board-designated endowment fund that can be, through prudent investing and spending, a consistent support for that nonprofit, and that can also serve as a signal to the community that you are good stewards of long-term funds and that it's worthy for them to think about putting you in their will or doing a planned gift for you. So I think these are things that, again, you think of endowment as something that only the largest institutions have. It's something that even smaller organizations can aspire to, that can provide that stability that can be very important for them, not only in their mission, but also in future fundraising as well.
That's good. I wanted to ask you about one more trend, and I had Jacqueline from the Women's Institute out of Indiana University on the podcast, and we talked about women in philanthropy.
Right.
The past studies have shown that women often play a powerful role in the charitable decision-making and tend to give differently than men. Did this year's findings find any or highlight any gender-related insights in giving or engagement?
They were consistent with what we've seen in the past. And if we see in gender terms, women do give and volunteer at a higher rate than men, that is to say, households headed by women. We also see certain types of affinity giving being taken up more particularly by members of affinity groups. So in our study, we actually lean into various types of not only gender, as I mentioned, generational also, but racial and ethnic groups. And it would not surprise you at all to see that although in the study as a whole, giving to special affinity areas might be relatively subdued, when you cut the data and ask members of that group what they give to, giving to areas relating to their own gender, affinity, and so on and so forth, is substantially higher. So what's the message for a nonprofit here? The message is this philanthropy is already occurring. It's not something that's aspirational. So if you have programs, or if you can create programs that are aligned with these particular interests, people will consider giving into those areas. And I think also of LGBTQ, these patterns of giving already exist in disproportionate form among these groups. And so if you can find ways to align and communicate that alignment to those groups, that can be a very productive conversation, I would argue.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that nonprofits need to consider, and expanding their view of who and what a donor could be beyond just what people traditionally think of as a donor. So there is a lot of opportunity out there, and you have to be able to tailor your mission and your programs, like you said, to have that value alignment. So, Bill, this has been such a rich and important conversation. What I love about this year's Bank of America Study of Philanthropy is how it captures both the head and the heart of giving. The data tells a story, but underneath it, obviously, it is the desire for meaning, for values alignment, and legacy. So thank you for sharing your insight and helping us better understand how generosity is evolving and how nonprofits can respond with authenticity, trust, and creativity. If our listeners want to learn more about this study, where can they find it?
They can Google Bank of America Study of Philanthropy, Look it up on a search engine. It will take you to the part of our website where there's a digital article and a summary, and they can contact their Bank of America advisor for a copy of the full study.
Perfect. We will also link to that in the show notes. Bill, thank you again for joining me on Lead with Heart.
Thanks, a pleasure.
Hey, before you go, want to watch? Yes, watch the best moments from the Lead with Heart episodes? We're sharing the most powerful highlights and takeaways over on our brand new YouTube channel. Yes, we are on YouTube. Just search for The Savvy Fundraiser on YouTube and hit subscribe so you never miss a moment of insight and inspiration. The link is in the show notes as well. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep leading with heart.